Okay, we're going to open up a public hearing on Senate Bill 707. Patrick, tell us where we are.
Mr. Chair, I will, as soon as I find my 707, I will read it with others hopping around. Okay. Senate Bill 707 establishes mandatory minimum sentences for persons who are people who are convicted of a crime if motivated by hatred of people who subscribe to a set of beliefs supporting capitalism and the needs of people with respect to their balance with nature. And it allows the court to impose a fine up to twice that otherwise authorized.
Eric?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Eric Winters. I'm an attorney from Portland, Oregon. And I'd like to first off thank the chair for sponsoring this bill on my behalf. And to begin with, I think I should probably announce that I have never been really a proponent of hate crimes legislation. As an attorney, I've always been troubled by the free speech and equal protection implications that were created by these laws. However, in Oregon and elsewhere, the courts have determined that this legislation is acceptable if it penalizes the motivation rather than the consequences of these sorts of acts. Since it's the rule of law in Oregon, I see no reason why groups of people who have strongly held political beliefs deserve any less protection than the current list of groups under the intimidation laws. This bill was inspired by the increasing trend of violent crimes against people and property by environmental terrorists. In its current form, this bill is narrowly focused against at crimes against capitalism. I'm here to explain the underlying theory behind this bill and to urge its amendment to include, instead of crimes just against capitalism, crimes against all political ideologies under Oregon's intimidation statutes. ORS 155 and 165 currently provide for criminal penalties for crimes motivated by the perception of a person's race, color, national origin, sexual orientation, or religion. The rationale behind hate crimes is to protect groups of people who share characteristics that have historically made them the victims of violent crimes. People with strongly held political beliefs have historically been victims of violent crimes. We can look at the abolitionists, people who crossed lines against strikers, communists throughout the 40s and the 50s, abortion providers, and now capitalists. These are all people who have been victims of targeted group violence. And let me reiterate, while I've never really been a supporter of hate crimes laws in general, I believe that if we're going to tell people that it is against the law to think bad thoughts while you're committing crimes, if those thoughts can be expanded to a group or a class of people that share similar characteristics, then we shouldn't distinguish between different groups and pick out our favorite groups. Political groups, people who have certain political beliefs deserve protection as well. I've also got some of my, a larger amount of thoughts that are in a paper that's been distributed around here, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Eric, I think it's an interesting thought that we would even establish that any kind of, particularly violent crime or crime against people and property that would in fact rise to their level of violence or vandalism or anything would have ever in fact been designated one above another based upon thought. And is there any case law to deal with this? I mean, when the idea of hate crime was proposed, I thought to myself, how in the world could that ever be constitutionally proper?
Well, it has been challenged on a number of different levels, and there have been hate crimes legislation that has been struck down at different times. And now, in order for it to survive, it has to be focused not upon the results or the consequences of the victims, but upon the elements have to set out what the person was thinking when they committed the crime. So if you're motivated by a perception, in Oregon, if you're motivated in your committing a criminal act by a perception of the other person's race or religion or sexual orientation, then that motivation, combined with the rest of the elements of the crime, become an additional criminal penalty.
So rather than just in raising the penalties for any given crime, then we added a certain class based upon what your opinion of the person or thing was before you took your
Exactly. We're punishing people in Oregon based upon the nature of their thoughts when they commit certain crimes. And if we're going to do that, I don't think that we should choose any specific group of people to protect from these sorts of people who have bigoted, hateful thoughts and act upon them in order to send messages. We should protect everyone.
So in other words, basically every crime then would have an analysis of the person's mental state and intent relative to any level of...
Well, what I'm suggesting is that currently under Oregon's intimidation laws, we protect 5 different categories of people. We protect people based upon their religion. If somebody is to go and burn down a church, they're going to, the person, in burning that church down, if they were motivated by hatred of that religion, well then they've committed an additional crime beyond arson. I'm not sure what the difference is between burning a church because you hate the religion and burning down a lumber mill because you hate people who log, or burning down a political office because you hate their activities, or burning down a car lot because they sell cars you think are wasteful.
Right, which we've just seen recently.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of documented evidence. About $40 million worth of damage has occurred in the last 5 years across the United States by organizations like the Earth Liberation Front, and more recently by groups that we haven't even been able to track yet.
The first time I had a dear friend of mine who's a veterinarian tell me that a veterinarian had been murdered and a facility had been destroyed, I thought he was kidding. I said, on the basis of, why did this crime occur? And they said, because he was taking care of animals. And I thought, and so the problem there would be, and of course what it involved was the fact that the person was involved in commercial agriculture, caring for animals that were in fact involved in agricultural practice. So that was the first time that I'd ever seen anything in which you would imagine that anyone would actually take the life of another person because of their political protest. Mm-hmm. But of course, no special penalty would occur here. Hopefully, the individual, if they caught them, got appropriate punishment. But that was pretty amazing. That was the first time I've ever experienced anything like that, where, based upon anything in relationship to enterprise,
sure,
that a person was to be killed.
Yes, I think your observation is very, very valid, Mr. Chair, because what we have really are underlying crimes that are very similar and already have stiff penalties, but we've chosen certain groups of people or classes of people that deserve additional protection. And the basis of that has been that these groups have historically been the victims of violence. And if you look at the last 5 years, capitalists have historically been the victim of violence, at least in Oregon.
Right. And the equality of law, in other words, that each person is to be treated fairly before the law.
Mm-hmm. It's been challenged under that, and I think it involves a lot of political hair splitting to make this thing jibe. I've never really agreed with it. I've always been troubled with it myself. But my basic position is that if we're going to carve out an extra layer of penalties for this type of behavior, then we should apply it across the board.
And it would be reasonable from the standpoint of now this is an ongoing and reoccurring threat to anyone
absolutely.
Involved in free enterprise. Any questions from the committee? Further questions? Eric, thank you, and thanks for bringing the bill to us. Very interesting concept, and I think would be something for us to try to get square, at least in all of our minds.
Meyer?
Meyer.
Okay.
Meyer,
sorry.
all right. Andrew, we'll let you state that for the record.
Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator George, members of the committee. My name is Andrea Meyer. I'm the legislative director for the ACLU of Oregon. We oppose this bill as drafted. Certainly, we would not oppose changes to the intimidation laws to if a crime is committed targeting persons because of their political beliefs or activities, but as currently drafted, we believe that this would run afoul of the Oregon Constitution, specifically Article 1, Section 20, the equal privileges and immunities, because what this, Senate Bill 707 does is picks out particular types of political belief to protect. When we look at the intimidation laws, the protections are race, religion, sexual orientation. It is not a particular race. It is not a particular religion that is carved out as protection. It is all. It does not matter what the race of the perpetrator is or what the race of the victim is. But this would be a particular subset of political beliefs, and as such would run afoul of that, and we believe unconstitutional. Thank you.
All right, that was short and sweet, thanks. Patrick, please.
Be happy to answer any questions.
All right.
The
Thank
next
you.
testifier is Mr. Bill Hauser.
Bill, welcome.
Thank you, Senator George. My name is Bill Hauser. I'm with the Oregon Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, and we also come to you opposed to this piece of legislation. Our organization has taken a position this legislative session that we are not in favor of any special classification of victims when it comes to criminal activity. If someone commits a crime, it doesn't matter what the kind of special group that victim comes from. It is a crime, and that person who commits the crime should be held accountable for that crime. In this case, we have a little bit of a difference than some of the other classification bills. A lot of the classification bills, for example, one that came through the House just recently was the classification of an assault 4 on a taxi driver becoming assault 3. This is more of the commission of a crime with a particular type of motivation. Motivation really is not an element of a crime. You have intent, which motive really sort of is a part of the evidence that proves usually the mental element like intent or knowledge. But this has to do with motivation. And the motivation of a person who commits a crime is in our position is not, that does not make a difference as far as how the person should be punished for that crime, the motivation. And so that is from a general perspective and our general idea concerning the legislation that might come before the body this session. That is going to be our position. When it comes right down to it, we all belong to a special group. And so to single out a particular special group for special recognition under the whether it be hate crime or any other kind of classification of victim, we think is wrong. Whether it be special group of state legislators, for example, or criminal defense lawyers that you commit a crime against, we should all be treated equally. And that's, thank you. I'd answer any questions you have.
That's a great response. That isn't what I was expecting, but it's that's really clear. I think one of the things, Bill, that the folks were trying to get here to bring us to is the idea that there is no end to this process. That once you've begun to not identify the crime, but in fact go back one step further and try to determine intent, as you point out, that's the basis of finding the person guilty, not by adding additional things to their sentence. So.
And frankly, Senator, when someone who's committing a crime, what they're thinking is almost always bad. That's almost
Right.
like part of it. So it's a matter of what one bad thing versus another bad thing.
I asked the question one time, did anybody ever murder anybody without hating them? And the answer is probably not, and if it was, it would have a special level of prosecution based upon probably something to do with accident. Okay, appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Thanks. Patrick, do we have any further people signed up?
No, Mr. Chair, we do not.
Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing on Senate Bill 707. And what I'd like to do right